Kind of you. Thank you for that very warm introduction. I'm grateful to be here. Some of you might be intrigued to know that I was just in India this past week, and I just only returned to US today, but I'm still on India time, so this is very easy for me to give. So my eyes tell me it's night, but I feel like it's morning with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me and including me in this conference. I'm wondering if it would be possible for me to share my screen. I have a little bit of a presentation that I put together. If not, I can just read from it. But if I could share it, that would be ideal. So let's see. I think it does not appear to be possible. Okay, so I will just read. Oh, there it is possible. Okay, it's come on. Thank you so much. All right, so you should be seeing my screen and my presentation. So my title that I've given, as you can see, Many Facets and Many Paths, Jain Philosophy and Dialogue with Sri Ramakrishna. And so the pictures here you have is a very famous painting of Sri Ramakrishna, Thakur, as many of us call him. And then you have here a many-faceted gemstone. This is an illustration of the Jain concept of anikantavad, that is the idea, the teaching of the anikant, or multiple nature of existence. And then below that, you see a picture of the very famous illustration of a famous story of the blind people and the elephant, each grasping a different part of the elephant and describing it in a different way. So these are all concepts that we're going to come back to in my presentation. So first, what is my thesis? The Jain doctrine of Anikantvad, which affirms the inherent complexity of reality, can serve as the basis for a methodology, a way of approaching anything really. It invites multiple interpretations of a text, a worldview, a work of art, a philosophical claim, or really any element of phenomenal reality. It is the opposite of what is often called reductionism in Jain terms. That would be ekantavada, that is the idea that things are only one way, right? It seeks to explain all phenomena in terms of one single phenomenon. So to take a very simple example, in ontology, in metaphysics, it's very often the case that people will argue either that everything is of a material nature, right? So that's materialism. On the other hand, you have idealism, the idea that everything is a modification of consciousness. So both of these are forms of reductionism. They take one aspect of our experience and say, well, it all boils down only to that. But the Jain tradition refuses to take that view. It says the reality is as complex as we experience it. So even though such simplification, reductionism can aid our understanding to some degree, it fails as a total explanation of reality, right? It can't explain every single facet of our existence. At least that's the Jain claim. Anikantavada and the Vijnana Vedanta, as it has recently come to be called, of Sri Ramakrishna, I'm arguing that these two philosophies can work in tandem to help articulate a philosophy of religious and philosophical pluralism and cosmopolitanism. I think many of you would likely agree that this is an urgent need of our time, that globally we find, I see it in the United States, I'm sure that many of you have observed this in India, and we see it in other parts of the world as well, that the extremism and the tendency to polarize in conversations, especially on social media, only my view is correct and everyone else is wrong, and everyone's extremely rude to one another, and sometimes even hateful and violent. And reality actually lends itself to many interpretations, and that's why there are so many worldviews and belief systems in the world. And it would be much more conducive to a peaceful, habitable world if we were to develop a philosophy that would help us see it in this way, right? That it is complex, that it can't all be reduced to just one thing, and that extremism is a failure of understanding. So this is the larger project that I am interested in and that I've been working on for many, many years. Today's presentation is very brief. I really just want to show how these two particular philosophies can work very well together toward the kind of understanding I've just described. So first we talk about Anekantavada, which comes from within the Jain tradition. It's connected with several factors, several elements within the Jain tradition gave rise to this doctrine. First, the Jain tradition is very famous for its focus on ahimsa, on nonviolence in thought, word, and action. Many contemporary Jain thinkers connect Anekantavada with ahimsa. They say that a way to practice ahimsa in speech is to express our views in a way that's not extreme, that's not offensive, that's not polarizing, that doesn't hurt the person who maybe has a different view and a different understanding. It's also connected with some of the intricacies of Jain philosophy. In particular, if you go back to the Agama literature of the Jain tradition, of specifically of the Shvetambara Jain tradition, Mahavir, the 24th Tirthankar of our era, uh, took a what is sometimes characterized as a both and approach to what are called in that literature the avyakta questions. We see this in the Buddhist Pali literature as well. The idea of very difficult questions may be unanswerable in any very easy way. And Mahavira tended to look at these questions and understand and perceive that there was a deeper complexity within the question itself. So, for example, someone would ask, is the self eternal or non eternal? And he would say, well, in one sense, it is eternal. If we think in terms of rebirth, if we think in terms of the karmic process of one soul going through many lifetimes, one jiva going through many bodies, it's eternal. In another sense, the self is non eternal. If by self you mean this complex of body, mind, spirit, that arises and passes away. So differing philosophical views can be accommodated within a worldview that shows that the essential claims of each one has some amount of truth, right? There's some facet of reality being described here. So Mahavir himself took this approach. It was developed much more in a much more sophisticated way by subsequent Jain teachers over the last 2 millennia. The pluralistic ontology, the metaphysics of the Jain tradition, which affirms the irreducibility of the basic substances making up reality. According to Jain teaching, reality is not all material, it's not all consciousness, it is a combination of multiple elements. There is jiva, for example, what's sometimes translated as soul, the life force, what differentiates a living being from a non-living being. Pudgala, that would be non-living matter. Dharma and adharma, which in this context actually refer to the principle of motion and the principle of rest. That's very distinctive to Jain philosophy. In some ways, this is comparable to the Sankhya concepts of rajas and tamas. Then you have kala, time, and akash, space. So, what is the purpose? What are the applications of this teaching of complexity, the complexity of existence? Traditionally, Jain thinkers have used Anekantavada as a methodology for conceptualizing difference across worldviews. That is, what do we make of the fact that there are people who think differently than we do? Are they simply wrong? Is this an occasion for skepticism? Well, from the Jain perspective, the idea is that there is some truth in many perspectives, that many views can be seen as in some sense true and in some sense false, and so on. This approach has been illustrated with the ancient parable of the blind people and the elephant, which I'm going to assume most of you are very familiar with. It comes from India. The oldest version, I believe, we have is from the Buddhist Pali scriptures, but it's been used frequently by Jain authors, by Buddhist authors, by authors from a variety of Vedic darshanas or schools of thought. And we'll see that Sri Ramakrishna himself used this parable. In the contemporary period, as I mentioned, many Jains see Anekantavada as an expression of intellectual ahimsa, an application of the principle of nonviolence to the realm of philosophical discourse. How can we disagree in a way that is not disagreeable, right? That is not violent. This was the approach of the late Acharya Mahaprajna, pictured here. who saw Anekantavada as a synthesis of relative and absolute perspectives. My own understanding of these doctrines has been very strongly shaped by Acharya Mahapragya's approach. And he had written a book on this topic, which was something I drew upon extensively when I was writing my own dissertation on this many years ago. And I think his understanding is really very thorough and draws upon a vast range of Jain texts and Jain knowledge. Mahatma Gandhi very famously was influenced by the Jain tradition. He actually described himself once as an adherent of Anekantavad. He said that this doctrine was for him a pragmatic one. It was a matter of learning to view others with empathy. To quote from his own words, he says, "Formerly, I used to resent the ignorance of my opponents. Today, I can love them because I'm gifted with the eye to see myself as others see me, and vice versa. I want to take the whole world in the embrace of my love." Right? He saw this doctrine not simply as a sort of abstract philosophical claim, but as a way of expressing the idea that we need to be able to see the world through others' eyes, right? That we need to be able to understand their perspectives if we're really going to have a complete understanding, and if we're going to also practice compassion and nonviolence, because everyone holds the view they do for a reason, right? Behind everyone's perspective, there is a story. That doesn't mean that everything everyone believes is true. That's, of course, not possible. But it means that we can develop a philosophy of empathy wherein we grasp what truth is being perceived in the perspective of others. I have an example here which I often use with students, and I find it's very helpful for explaining this concept of Anekantavada. This comes from the physical sciences, from astronomy and from physics specifically. We have here 6 different pictures of the same object. This is the Crab Nebula. It's many, many hundreds of light years from Earth. The light that we receive from it left it many, many centuries ago. And what we see here is the same object, but we see 6 different pictures. And these pictures have all been taken using different wavelengths of light. So you see a radio picture, an infrared, one through visible light. This is how it would appear in a telescope if you looked at it with your eye. Then we have ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. And what I'm fond of doing when I present this to students is posing the question, which of these is the correct picture of the Crab Nebula? And they pretty quickly grasp that, well, in a sense, none of them are, or in a sense, all of them are. But there's no single correct picture of the Crab Nebula. What has happened is that we are seeing different aspects, different facets of this object through the different wavelengths of light. Each photograph is different from the others. Each discloses a different part of the structure that's there, but they're all real. They're all there. They're all part of that object. And so, in a similar fashion, we can say, from the perspective of Anekantavad, that what we are saying in our varied traditions and belief systems, whether it's about God, about the afterlife, about the meaning of existence, about the nature of reality, that these are akin to photographs taken using different wavelengths of light, right? Bringing the assumptions of various cultures, texts, traditions, the various practices that also shape our consciousness through the practice of traditions. All of these things are conducive to perceiving reality in a certain way. We bring all of these together, we see it's like the Crab Nebula, right? It has many facets, many aspects. So, what does all this have to do with Sri Ramakrishna? Well, if we believe the stories about his life, then we would have to say that he was someone who uh, did a very profound series of experiments with truth, to use Gandhi's term. His mind became, you could say, almost like the telescope looking at the nebula through different wavelengths of light, as he utilized the practices and the beliefs of diverse traditions to experience ultimate reality in the ways that would be disclosed to him through those practices. And according to the accounts of his life, he did this, and he had a multiple array of very powerful, very transformative experiences through the media of diverse religious traditions and practices. So he's, of course, a figure of the 19th century. and of course, well known as the teacher of Swami Vivekananda, who brought Vedanta teaching to my country, to the United States. The first guru to come to the Western world was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He was born in a small village called Kamarpukur in Bengal, today West Bengal. I recommend visiting it. I had the opportunity to do so 10 years ago. It was a wonderful experience. From his childhood, he displayed a tendency toward intense trance states, which he interpreted as samadhi, as the state described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra as the complete merging of the consciousness of the practitioner into the object of the practitioner's meditation, the object of the practitioner's focus. And so he had these experiences, sometimes spontaneously, sometimes induced through spiritual practices such as meditation, singing, bhakti practices, and so on. He became a priest of the goddess Kali at the Dakshineshwar Kali temple in Calcutta at the age of 19. And his brother passed away at that time, which created a crisis for him. He began to feel a great longing to experience the goddess Kali directly, to see her, to perceive her. Otherwise, he felt, what is the point of this sort of ritualistic worship if there's no goddess there, right? So he prayed with great longing, and it was filled with such intensity that his contemporaries feared for his sanity, right? He was very intensely transforming his mind through the kind of spiritual longing that he experienced. And after he had this experience, he had a very powerful experience in the Kali temple. He saw the goddess as waves and waves of light descending upon him. And after this, he began to practice a variety of sadhanas. And over the course of the next few years, he attained this same samadhi state through the diverse methods provided by those traditions in which those sadhanas, from which they came. So his first of these many famous visions is the vision of Ma Kali, the mother goddess. Here in this illustration, you see the temple of Dakshineshwar in the background. Ramlal, this was a little statue of Ram, of the very famous Avatar Vishnu Ram, that was brought to Dakshineshwar by a sadhu, and Sri Ramakrishna prayed so intensely to this figure that for him it appeared to come to life, and he would play with the figure like a little boy, and they would play games, and this was the form of devotion that he had for Ram in this particular image. He had a very famous devotion to Sri Krishna, Lord Krishna. This is a statue of Krishna from the Dakshineshwar temple complex. Very famously, this particular image was once broken. The leg was broken, and there was a crisis because you're not supposed to continue using a broken image in ritualistic worship. But the statue was quite expensive and beautifully made, and they really didn't want to throw it away. And Sri Ramakrishna said, "Would you throw away your brother if he broke his leg?" And he took the statue, and it's not very well known, but he was actually an artist as well as a spiritual figure, and he repaired the statue, and so perfectly that it's extremely difficult to discern that it was even ever broken. He undertook tantric sadhanas. This was under a woman called the Bhairavi. Bhairavi Brahmani, she was his guru in tantric practice, and he experienced samadhi through this means as well. He practiced Advaita Vedanta under the tutelage of a monk named Totapuri. We actually have a photograph of Totapuri. Here he is, very striking figure, sage who had renounced everything. You see, he didn't even wear clothing. And through the practice of Advaita Vedanta, he had the experience of non-duality, going beyond form. And this was another samadhi which he experienced. He also practiced with a Sufi teacher and had a very powerful vision through the practice of Islam. And also finally Christianity. He listened to stories from the Gospels at the home of a devotee, and had a vision of Jesus, and in which the two of them merged as one being. So Sri Ramakrishna spoke of his many practices. He said he had practiced all the religions, right? The religions that were available to him. Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. He followed the paths of the different Hindu sects and traditions. And he said, I have found that it is the same God toward whom all are directing their steps, though along different paths. The substance is one under different names, and everyone is seeking the same substance. Only climate, temperament, and name create differences. Let each person follow his own path. If he sincerely and ardently wishes to know God, peace be unto him, he will surely realize him. Right? This was what Ramakrishna had experienced, and he believed that anyone who practiced with wholehearted devotion, whatever the path, they would perceive, they would have an experience, a direct experience of that ultimate reality in that particular form. Uh, I mentioned the story of the blind men and the elephant, and this is Sri Ramakrishna's version of that story. The group who came across an animal that they heard was an elephant. They were asked what it was like, and they began to feel its body. Once the elephant was like a pillar, he had touched only its leg. Another said it was like a winnowing fan, he had touched only its ear. In this way, the others, having touched its tail or belly, gave their different versions of the elephant. Just so, Ramakrishna says, a man who has seen only one aspect of God limits God to that alone. It is his conviction that God cannot be anything else. And so, if our experience is limited, then we will only perceive what is available to our particular understanding. But we have to realize that there are many understandings, many approaches to reality. This understanding has been described by Swami Medhananda as Vijnana Vedanta. Vijnana is a state beyond even higher than the non-dualistic realization, in which one perceives that the divine reality has indeed become all things. And Ramakrishna describes this. He says through the process of Advaita, through the neti neti, that not this, not this. Beyond this is once we do this, this is the reality is then found to have become the universe and all its living beings. The Vijnani sees that the reality which is nirguna, beyond limiting qualities, is also saguna, possessed of qualities. Those who realize Brahman in Samadhi find it is Brahman that has become the universe and its living beings. This is known as Vijnana. So Sri Ramakrishna's understanding that many paths to ultimate reality can coexist, that ultimate reality has become all things. This is consistent with the Jain understanding of reality having many facets. Each facet corresponds to a worldview and way of life which is oriented around it. Or okay, so we had some very interesting sounds just then. So, as Sri Ramakrishna put it very succinctly, jatomat tatopat, right? There's as many systems, as many ways of thinking as there are, as many paths. And so my time is very brief today, so I don't want to take too much more time. I want to open it for questions if possible. But the basic idea here is not that Jainism and Ramakrishna are teaching exactly the same thing. There are interesting and important differences between the two philosophies, but they converge in this particular area. And I think this is a very important one, right? That pluralism is something that we can express and articulate in a way that is compelling and that can help us explain why extreme views are mistaken, right? Because they're excluding many, many elements of truth, which in fact are there. So thank you all very much. And if there's any time for questions, we can take some.
Thank you, Professor Long, for an excellent presentation. Your insights were truly enlightening, and I'm sure that they will inspire much discussion and debate among our attendees. Um, is there anyone have a question or query regarding the presentation? They can raise their hand. And also can unmute themselves and ask the question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I always thought of Ramakrishna Paramahansa as a Hindu practitioner, and it was indeed very enlightening to know that he studied different religions and received enlightenment through all of them. And it's a very holistic view. It gives me a new perspective whenever I will read Ramakrishna or even Swami Vivekanand, I will be able to relate this to my readings. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Thank
We
you.
don't have a question.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else having questions?
So I'll just add, and thank you very much for your comment, that if you want to know much more in detail about his sadhanas with Christianity and with Islam, there's a book called the Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga in Bangla, if you can read Bangla, and there's a wonderful English translation by Swami Chaitananda called Sri Ramakrishna and His Divine Play. And it's a very detailed biography of Ramakrishna. It was written by Swami Sharadananda, who was one of his original disciples, who knew him directly. And after he had passed away, Swami Sharadananda began collecting as many stories and as much information as he could find about him, and wrote that book. It's quite a massive volume, and about half of it is taken up with his various sadhanas across different traditions.
Pragya ji, please ask your question.
My Prakrit instructor is here.
Hello, Dr. Long. How are you?
I am doing well. Good to see you.
Yeah, Jain, good morning.
Jajaninder.
Dr. Long, this was really nice to know how Ramakrishna Paramhans was influenced by Nikantavada. But I just want to know, had he ever come across Jainism, or had he ever read anything, or was he influenced by Jainism, or this was his own philosophy?
Yeah, this was his own philosophy. I asked this question myself and did quite a bit of investigation, because if you're familiar with Jain philosophy, this immediately leaps at you. You know, that what he's doing really appears to fit the spirit of Anekantavada. We know he had a small murti of Mahavira in his room, and regarded him as an enlightened being. There is a Jain community in Bengal. They mostly are descendants of people who migrated from the Marwar region in the 19th century itself, and some in the 18th century. And I found there is one account of him having interactions with Marwari devotees, but from the context, those appear to have been Vaishnava devotees, because